I'm a different type of cat. I think in a lot of ways. I mean, I would have loved to have been a play-by-play man like my friend Spiro Ditas, who's called the Lakers and Knicks, and Ryan Rugo and all these. I would have loved to have been that guy. My voice just wasn't there. I wasn't that good. I got to see what that good was shoulder to shoulder with me in college, right? But what I am is a feelings guy. And this is a big industry. You can do a lot of different things. And feelings can be those sports debate feelings that may touch a third rail, maybe adversarial, maybe provocative, maybe provoking your audience. I'm never going to be that guy either. But it's pretty good to not be that guy too. It's pretty good to say, I'm a happy, joyous guy. And if I got a note, then I got 100 notes after Around the Horn. I like the way you see sports, see the world through sports or see sports through the world. Well, that's a great note. I love that. So let me build the next show that kind of plays in that space too. And then after that, come a game show. After that could come a sports kids show. That's where my head is, and not just the next debate
Hi
show.
everyone, Tim Kitzer with you, the voice of NBA Jam. From top journalists and authors to rising influencers and insiders, Hoopsology brings you the voices driving basketball forward. With elite guests and sharp analysis, Matt, Justin, and Alan keep you plugged into everything hoops. From downtown, boom shakalaka.
Our guest has hosted ESPN's Around the Horn for over 20 years, and his new podcast, Real Deal, is built around one unforgettable moment at a time. A play, a clip, a photo, a legend. The moments that shape sports and continue to resonate long after the final whistle. Every episode begins with an iconic image, using it as a starting point to explore why the moment still matters and why it continues to move fans years later. We have the pleasure in welcoming Tony Reali onto Hoopsology. Welcome, Tony.
Justin, when you say it like that, I'm excited. I want to watch that show. Sports moments. You see where I'm coming from. I just did daily sports television for 25 years, and every news story is a news story, and it's great. You're reacting to what just happened. But that's part of my sports fandom. It's not all of it. It's not the entirety. I love getting lost in the rabbit holes of those sports moments and plays and those athletes that come up in your feed and you see them once and you're like, oh, I can hear that story again and again and again. That's what I'm hoping to unpack with Real Deal.
No, that's so cool because I think that's what we try to do on Hoopsology, but from a basketball angle, because there's the mainstream talking points all the time, but no one really delves into why do people play basketball in the first place? Why do they want to dedicate their lives?
The humanity of the sport, right? That's
correct.
Why we fell in love to begin with. And that's exactly why I was so happy to hear when you reached out. I'm like, absolutely. I love the name. I mean, Hoopsology. I mean, that I want to borrow that. Did you think about hoopsonometry and hoops history? But the name gets it. It's the study of hoops, which is great.
No, I appreciate it. Before we delve into your career, we have a bit of a tradition on our show. And you can take this question any way you want it. What is your first or favorite basketball memory?
Okay, so I moved from New York to New Jersey in my early, 10 years old or so, right? Then we're into the 90s now is what I'm trying to say. And the New Jersey Nets had just drafted Derek Coleman and Kenny Anderson, in quick succession, right? And White Castle, which is a hamburger chain in our neighborhood, was putting together a sack of tickets. And that's how we could never get Knicks tickets. We couldn't get to the Garden, but we could get to what was the Brendan Byrne Arena and then the Continental Airlines Arena to see Nets. So we bought the White Castle sack of maybe it was Sunday tickets maybe for the season. My first memories are Drazen Petrovic, Kenny Anderson, and Derek Coleman, a team that is forgotten in time, I think, but really had some promise. And I would say most of all, Justin, that's a team I would love to see if they were playing 2026 NBA basketball. Because I think Derek Coleman is a player who met his full potential in the NBA in the 90s, and for whatever reason, his superstardom got hit with a ceiling. But I think he'd be a better player now than he was in the 90s. And I would say the same is true for Drazen Petrovic. I think he'd be a superstar in today's game.
Do you feel like those teams are lost in time? I feel like there's a disconnect of that history and lineage of the New Jersey Nets and the Brooklyn Nets now. I feel like
Yeah.
even though they
It's
kind
a
of
messy thing that
yeah.
happens in professional sports when the Cleveland Browns leave for the Baltimore Ravens. And now are the Ravens' records tied to Otto Graham, an old quarterback, and the championships the Cleveland won or not, right? And then the Browns came back years later and made it really messy. What happens with Seattle and Oklahoma City, right, in the NBA? So the Nets are lost for time. They really are, and they're a franchise now, especially with the Knicks being finally at the top of the mountain, that are kind of lost as well. They made a big push with uh, Prokhorov and Jay Z and let's even say the notorious Big uniforms to really embrace Brooklyn, which I think was smart. But New Jersey got lost along the way. So what do you remember from the New Jersey Nets, if you even remember the New Jersey Nets? It could be the tie-dye uniforms from the 90s, which is very, very memorable and forgettable for a lot of reasons. I'll give you another thing I remember. This is a Reali origin story. This is the type of moment I want to do on Real Deal. My brothers and I went to Six Flags Great Adventure for the sports installation they had attached to the roller coasters for a brief week or two in the summer. And I got to put on a headset and call famous sports moments, which is my dream all along, Justin. I always wanted to be Mike Breen. Always wanted to be Chris Carino. Always wanted to be Ryan Rucco, somebody now who I know and is younger than me, but still keep that going, the play-by-play man. It didn't play out that way. But at the Six Flags Great Adventure sports installation, they gave you a headset and a videotape, and you got to call a famous sports moment. And the moment I just randomly got with my brother Michael was Shaquille O'Neal and the Orlando Magic taking down the backboard against the New Jersey Nets, a game I watched as a kid. He famously brought down the stanchion, right? So I got to call this moment, and it was a dream of mine. Now I get home, and they give you that VCR tape, and you're like, oh, I'm going to put it in my VCR. I know I'm saying all these words that young listeners don't know, but I got the tape of me calling my moment with my brother Michael to find out the headset I was plugged into, the microphone was not working.
Oh no. Oh
And you
man.
only got my voice. You only got my voice in the background of my brother's microphone, so Shaquille
Oh
O'Neal is going up for the shot. And then my brother comes in full voice. He takes it down. He went up with the ball and came down with the rim. Another great moment. The Nets were involved. The Nets are forgotten. That's a long reality story to tell you. The Nets of New Jersey are forgotten, lost in time, never to return. And the Brooklyn Nets have a lot of work to do now to get even a borough of New York after what the Knicks just did.
no, totally true. To your point about the New Jersey Nets, on your time on Around the Horn, and
Yeah.
since we're a basketball podcast, I'm just so curious with basketball topics, just
Yeah.
through your time, on that show, how often do you think basketball dominated the conversation compared to other
Well,
sports?
basketball came to dominate the conversation in greater ESPN, I feel. In the mid to 2000s, to early 2010s. I mean, we can diagnose what that is. Maybe it's ESPN got the NBA contract from NBC, right? ABC and ESPN. That could be part of it. I do know I have had the privilege in my career of working with the great Hall of Fame reporters, primarily from the Basketball Hall of Fame. Certainly Woody Page has done his time in the NFL with the Denver Broncos, but he also did his time in the ABA with the Memphis Tams. But I had Bob Ryan, who's a Mount Rushmore NBA journalist in the Hall of Fame. I had Jackie McMullen, who is a Mount Rushmore. My Mount Rushmore has more than 4 heads. Sue me. Hall of Fame reporter. I had Jay Donde. I had Frank Isola, who should be a Hall of Fame and will be a Hall of Fame journalist, I think, when it's all said and done. I worked shoulder to shoulder with Mike Wilbon, another Hall of Fame journalist. The people who were closest to me in my background, in a lot of way, are the best at covering the sport of basketball. So it only became obvious to me as host of Around the Horn, if I'm really going to utilize the best that I have around me at that moment, or I say me, us as a show, well, that's Bob Ryan, that's Woody Page. Justin, just to pause for 1 second. I could go back to a 1978 NBA register where if I pulled out the register now, there's a a chapter in it, and it's NBA versus ABA because it was right after the merger, and it's Bob Ryan versus Woody Page, and the little characters of them are in that 1978 NBA register. And
Wow.
I had that on Around the Horn every day from 2002 to 2025. That's an amazing piece of NBA history. So I'd be a fool not to lean into that history. And I do believe NBA, along with NFL and Major League Baseball, which are some of my other loves. My love of sports, I don't really put a pecking order. I don't. But I would say the NBA. And then we learned to embrace Monica McNutt, who is now a face of the current NBA, and many others, along with that. As we expanded in our lineup at Around the Horn. But I would say I was very proud to say our NBA coverage was as good as any.
Was there a memorable debate that comes to mind? Can you narrow it to one
Well, I
topic?
have to now marry my history into PTI and Around the Horn because I
Sure.
am
Of course.
a man who grew up on Party Interruption. I was a founding member, thankfully, as a researcher who was promoted to sidekick the week before we went to air, and I became Stat Boy, and I am Stat Boy. I'm not. I'll always be Stat Boy as we celebrate the 25th anniversary of PTI. I know there's a
Wow.
group text going around now how we're going to get together, of course. And I'll be Stat Boy again if they have me for as long as they want in October when we celebrate that. But my point is, for me, there's nothing more delicious than two moments, and both of them I attached to PTI in my memory. Of course, we did it on Around the Horn too, but I attach it to PTI in my memory. It's the NBA draft where my dear friend Tony Kornheiser delivered the line, "If he maxes out his potential, I'll take Darko." Darko Milicic over LeBron James. I mean, there was a qualifier, but in that greater conversation, when we were considering LeBron, Carmelo, and Darko, Kornheiser walked himself into saying, if he maximizes his potential, Darko could be the best. So that's a moment that I remember because that to me is half of what we do in sports, right? Check the tape. Go back and see what we said in the moment. In the moment, Tony, I don't know how he scouted, who he talked to in that moment, but someone told him Darko had something. And Wilbon had always taken Carmelo over LeBron well into the second season of their careers. Carmelo had a more wins his rookie year. That was something, with Denver, that Kornheiser. And then I remember, of course, the decision. That was, we did specials on that for Around the Horn at PTI. That was such a moment in time that was huge sports. And then of course I remember 2016. My wife had a business trip in Italy in June 2016. I did not take days off for 10 years, but now we're at a stage where I'm married. I'm taking days off. She's got a business trip in Italy. I'm an Italian American. Justin, I'm going on that business trip. So I booked it 2 weeks before. All right, my wife's there. I signed off Game 3 of the NBA Finals saying, this is the position I'm in, but I'm going on a business trip. Pablo, keys are yours. Go host this perfect season from Golden State as they win, as they had taken the lead in this series. I'm watching Game 5 and Game 6 from Italy, and I'm booking a flight, and I came home for Game 7. And I said, I'm hosting the show, which was a fine thing I could do. And I said to Pablo, let's get you a press pass and you go cover this game. So Pablo, I wasn't bigfooting him and just saying you're done. He got to cover Game 7 of the 2016 NBA Finals, which is a pretty good deal. But that was such a big moment. I could not be away from that. So that is another time when your career, you say like, oh, I got to be here for this. I got to be doing Around the Horn the day after Game 7 of the NBA Finals. I flew back from my vacation. And I probably shouldn't have been taking, honestly, it's the finals, but it was just the perfect storm for me, a Reali. Oh, my wife's in Italy, I'm going there, this is my chance to get a free trip back to the, so that's what happened. So that's another moment, of course. I remember how we talked about the block that day, how we talked about, I always feel I'm going to do a show on moments here. I may do the block, I may do that series, but I would even get more microscopic. For me, it's Steph Curry going behind his back with a minute left in that game. I mean, how unpack that moment? How did he feel comfortable doing that? It both embodied everything that their spirit was, but it was also a moment that the game got away from them in an odd way in NBA history. I also think that's kind of forgotten, or at least not talked about as much. There's a turnover on a behind-the-back dribble pass from Steph in the greatest series and the most significant collapse and the greatest comeback in NBA history. So that's the type of feeling that I'm hoping to unlock in a lot of my episodes.
When you have a piece of commentary, for instance, you brought up with Tony Kornheiser when he mentioned that Dark had more potential than LeBron, or there's
Yeah.
other things that are said either on PTI or on Around the Horn
Yeah.
that turn out to be completely wrong. How often do either you or the other panelists hear about it?
Gotcha.
Doesn't trust be
Yeah,
shows later.
I am not so much a takes guy. I'm happy to live in a space where I'm not. I came up in an industry, Justin, a little bit older than you, or considerably older than you, where we used a phrase. This is a basketball phrase. The host is the point guard, which
Yeah.
is very, very funny. I would call Ernie Johnson the consummate point guard, right? And host. You're dishing out, but it's a Bob Cousy point guard. It's not what we know now to be the point guard of 2026, the Steph Curry point guard who could pull from anywhere, Trae Young point guard. It's a different type of point guard. So I wasn't doing takes, and I'd be happy to rip off some takes from time to time. My love of sports is not trying to predict what might happen, nor is it trying to say with certainty what will happen. But around the panelists, of course, were required to do that. Although I made it clear to them, I was always going to try to do that with love. I don't love the feeling when someone calls me on something that I said, right? I don't love the idea of calling out somebody as a flip-flopper. I certainly did early on in my career of Around the Horn. The show was almost structured that way. But as I grew comfortable in my role as a host and a showrunner, let's say, I knew that was hurtful in some ways to some people. I mean, you're out there. You're out in public. And I saw the rise of social media. I'm fortuitous to be somebody with a thick skin, I think. But I recognize not everybody has that comfort in themselves. And yeah, it can get hairy for people. So I tried not to play gotcha as much or play it in a way that the joke would be, look at this reality that we live in where we were asking you for a take. A flip-flop for me now means something different, as I have been in sports media for 25 years. And I have seen it get, I would say even, I'll be honest, more adversarial than I would like. Okay? This is not a criticism of sports media. Justin, it's a reality check that sports debate, something I've been happy to be part of and can be considered in some ways. I wouldn't call myself a founding member of it. I didn't invent it, but I certainly moved the ball down the court in sports debate in some ways. I hope if you viewed Around the Horn, you saw it came with a wink, whereas other shows are doing it with a different tone. Kornheiser and Wilbon are best friends. They're mentor and mentee. They are a married couple even. I think you could sense there is love underneath the yelling that might come. But other shows, and I'm not calling out shows. I mean, we know what the shows are. First Take, Get Up, all the great shows. First Things First, all the great shows of today. Maybe they're not choosing to do it with the same tone. I was intentional with my tone and Around the Horn, especially as I became comfortable as host, that I was hoping it came with a wink and a baseline of friendship or love or smart aleckness. But it is tough, I think, for some people to recognize what the industry is and what comes with that, which is some very, very strong words coming back at you in social media. I hope the people who get gotcha'd and freezing cold takes is a social media profile I'm aware of that I enjoy looking at and watching. But I can imagine when you're picked up by them sometimes, if they get you in the wrong space, it could hurt,
Do you feel like with a lot of sports debate shows, it used to be like your show? I'll just be transparent. I mean, I was just a huge fan of PTI Around the Horn. And
Thank
when
you.
I was in Washington, D.C., I bought a PTI t-shirt when I was in high school. I mean, I was a super fan.
That is a
So,
collector's item.
Totally.
Yeah, we should get-
Sadly, I lost it. I don't know where it is. It's a bummer because I'm like, where's that t-shirt? And I lost it. But I just feel, to your point, I feel like your shows dictated how debates should be done. Journalists had credibility. They would cover events based on their experiences, and their opinions would be based on just researched, just information that they would formulate.
Information,
Yes,
access.
correct, exactly.
Yeah.
And I just feel now it's kind of in the reverse, where it's like social media is dictating how these debate shows should go, and the social media has none of access, has no information, it has no transparency. It's just based on a lot of just random people, and I just
Yeah.
feel like that's been lost over time. I'm just wondering, in your opinion, why do you think that's been in terms of like the sports debate shows not being,
Great
I
question.
don't know, above the
Justin,
fray?
yes,
Yeah.
it's a wonderful question. It's something, of course, I experienced in real time.
Yeah.
I think it's a generational thing, and that's not a negative. That's I mean, are things cyclical? I would say they're more evolutionary. The evolution of what social media is, and social media isn't just a sports thing. Just applied to many of the public discourse in politics, in culture. In movie criticism. You can apply it to that too. It's there's positives and negatives to this, but everyone had a voice. I could speak honestly about my friends here. Um, Around the Horn was a show, and PTI is a show, where it was required for a long time to have written the piece in the newspaper. And I was part of a voice that said, well, let's expand that a little bit and make it to a voice maybe on radio. Uh, and then a voice maybe on commentary, opinion on .coms, and then maybe a voice, Bomani Jones and Pablo Torre would be examples. They were magazine writers primarily, even at their early stages, and radio in Bomani's case. That means I felt they earned their opinions from doing the work in on the radio or in their magazine pieces. But you can understand how somebody who was in the locker room every day was saying, well, they're not us. Bill Simmons would be the greatest example of this. He wasn't in the locker room per se. But now you would consider them to be some of the old guard, and some of the new guard are completely different. But the generation that grew up with access to voice being on, well, I started my own blog and I started my own, now you could be on Spotify creators and start your own podcast. And I don't run away from that. That's a good thing to me. More voices will always be a good thing. It brings variety. It brings diversity of thought, diversity of profile, diversity of so many different things, right? So it is a good thing. But the viewer, the consumer, still has the opportunity to decide what they prefer. And it may have been numbers that certain networks, ESPN being one of them, but all networks, were reading where embrace debate was something that they felt was resonating, and then they leaned into that. And that was their active decision. I don't believe sports media is broken. I say this again. I do believe sports is the most joyful, joyous, human thing we got, basically, in the world, in a lot of ways. And it's where you learn feelings in a lot of ways. So that's what my path and lane into that is, to stay in that place. And sports media should look like that. It should look like that joyous, unifying, emotion at the forefront type thing. But other people can disagree with that, and they can feel like being provocative is what works. It works in politics. It works in some of the other culture things I was telling you about. Let's be honest. Food. Yeah. All right. I forget some of these chefs. I don't watch these shows so much, but the chefs, or Simon Cowell.
Yeah.
Who's the English chef with the big yellow hair?
Gordon Ramsay.
Gordon Ramsay. Right.
Yeah.
Now, it's interesting that Cowell, Ramsay, and Howard Stern have all evolved their profiles since, when they realized for 10 years they were the face of, you stink, yeah, blah, 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 blah. I was never a you stink guy. I don't like saying that to people. I would never go on a show and ask, somebody to put themselves out there and then call them out for their singing voice or their dish. But we saw what it did. It worked. It absolutely braked in the ratings, So that's not wrong. What's great about what I believe the sports media is it's expanded to such a degree that you're here, right? And and Kenny Beecham's here, and Jimmy High Roller's here, along with Bill Simmons, who's doing that with Zach Lowe, and along with Stephen A., who's doing what Stephen A. does, along with Mike Wilbon. That, the table, I'm at a ridiculous, this is not my house, nor my thing. I'm a boardroom man now, man. I live here. The table is growing and growing. And as a consumer, I get to choose. Justin, I'm very long-winded. I apologize. But I took a year off from being on TV.
No.
And I thought about it over and over again. Every instinct of my body was to do my next show the next day. And maybe even set up a Spotify creators or my own YouTube page, because I have the privilege of having a profile to a certain extent and just cooking that way. But I realized I needed to learn and educate myself. And I took what amounted to a master's course, I should say, in studying what the current landscape is now. And it took me back closer to you, closer to YouTube creators. I studied Colin and Samir in the last year, more than I studied my colleagues and friends and see what Colin Cowherd and Dan Patrick are doing, and Nick Wright and Adam Shine, and see, how I studied Conan O'Brien, not comparing myself talent-wise, but just a man who was on TV for 20 years. How is he taking over in digital? How's he putting content out there? Studied that a lot more. I studied Rick Beato, a music, and none of these are adversarial people who are putting out content adversarial. They are approaching their craft in the same joy first, feeling first. So sports media can handle that as well. I believe there's space for that.
No, totally agree. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you this. Just me telling you just how much of a big fan of your show and PTI as well. And along with being a huge basketball fan, I'm a huge combat sports fan. And so seeing the show from this genesis around horror and PTI, I'm just wondering with there's other sports that might be unusual that might get into the discourse. I think sports is a very traditional place. So it's always, you have the big four and then you have the Olympics and then other sports are maybe looked down upon. But as I've grown up, we've seen other sports that might be considered taboo or on the alternative really get into the discourse. For instance, combat sports, particularly the UFC, mixed martial arts, and even like the X Games, which ESPN had a massive role in, influencing this extreme sports. So I'm just wondering when there's a big topic that might take place outside of the normal traditional sports view, how did Wilbon, Kornheiser, and all the other panelists really take to discussing these topics over time when, ESPN did not have a deal with the UFC for a long time. They didn't have a deal. They had deals with X Games, but it's more like in the summer or winter. But sometimes the events might just overtake what's usually happening in the, everyday discourse of sports. So how did you guys deal with that?
You're keen to point out that rights does. I mean, I'm not saying no one ever said, oh, we can't talk about this because of rights. But I'll even use a broader example, the Olympics.
Yes.
We're on TV, and they're the biggest stories, and they're delicious stories, and Wilbon and Kornheiser had covered many, many games, and Woody Page and Tim Kalishaw and Kevin Blackistone had covered many, many games, and you don't have the rights to the video. They're happening simultaneously to when our show is. You're asking it, and there were times where we just ignored them, right? We didn't jump in on a story that clearly had merit to be talked about, and that may be true with UFC. I mean, then I felt as a showrunner, we owed it to our audience to be doing it justice. And if I could not get people who were, I felt, expert enough to talk about it, just dropping in and asking, Woody covered UFC 1. And every conversation we had about UFC, every single minute after that, that was invoked, right?
Yeah, sure was.
Was he studying Patty's most recent or Conor McGregor's most recent games? Does he know John Jones? No, but he knows his second sentence was going to be, I covered UFC 1. It wasn't elevating the conversation. The point has to be, I mean, you can be entertaining, you have to be enlightening, you should elevate the conversation, you should bring something to the table, and sometimes you had to make an active decision. We weren't bringing something to the table. There were times when conversations, we were required to talk about it. It was too big. I can't really think of an example right now. In any sport that is not one of the sports my generalist columnists had even covered in the past, they would like to. I would like to praise them, and they would like to be proud that they've covered 27 different events. But just covering UFC 1 once doesn't mean you should be on ESPN talking about it. And we had to be wise about that, just because I felt it was strong. There's, so that's not the right answer. It's not the best answer. There is some self-criticism in that. There were times I knew we were not going to really bring the best argument or discussion to this. But then, as I evolved as a host, I think maybe I tried to expand how they could talk about it and talk in I don't know, this is sounding vague in general, but the more human entry into the story, if you were dropped in as a general columnist and asked to cover this, how would you cover it this day? Well, okay, examine it in that way, right? Rather than who should be in the top, who's the best pound for pound? Is it, Fedor? Is it John Jones?
Sure.
I didn't go heavy into that. So that was how I tried to maybe expand, and with some successes and some failures in there as well. I would say also, the WNBA would be an example. I'm not talking about niche sports. I'm not trying to even put words on that, but there were times where I was like, we got to be talking about this today, guys. We have to be. And what that led to an expansion in roster, honestly. And could UFC have been the next? I mean, I would have loved to have Ariel Helwani on. He and I have talked numerous times. He would have loved to have been on Around the Horn. We would have built it. He would have been at some point, yeah. And now with the way the rights rate with ESPN, maybe that would have been easier mountain to climb. I wouldn't even call it a mountain to climb. It wasn't like there was resistance, but it was just a reality check. We were doing 8 topics. It was going to be one of the 8 topics, but it wasn't going to be the only one. We were still talking about Bears training camp that day, and we were still talking about the Mets losing streak that day, and we were still talking. So to drop, somebody who was well, Ariel is great. He could
Yeah,
talk
plug anything.
football, basketball. He could do
Yeah.
anything. But I was just saying, if we had added, that's where we would have been. Well, we still had to be true to our whole show.
It was interesting because you mentioned even like the W, and that's been entered into just the common sports discourse, especially these days. With just the journalists that you interacted with, was there resistance into incorporating these new league
Never
or sports?
resistance from the journalist I was with. No.
Gotcha.
I mean, there was a important, significant, and very true fight. This is a positive sign. Wilbon, I will give even the most credit. In rooms, he would hold and Kornheiser. I learned this. Let's say elbow to elbow with them. They would put certain topics up to the test. Why has this earned the right for us to be doing it? Why are we doing it just for the sake of doing it? That newsroom had purposeful, intentional conflict. Even I brought that even with the other producers of PTI. Remember, my friend Frankie and I would go head to head, and people would say, "All right, take it down, calm it down." Why this deserved to be in the show, and so some of that is necessary to have a good newsroom. I remember when the Washington Post sports section in the last year pivoted, and I remember writing a social media post about it, Substack post about it, because what occurred to me was you're losing conflict in the newsroom, and conflict in the newsroom is necessary, right? The whole break some eggs to make an omelet type thing. And now people are just firing off social media posts and full-on blogs without even an editor to provide any pushback. And maybe that's why some of them are so half-baked, right? So but full-on resistance, we're not talking about that. I was fortunate to work with journalists who know the number one rule is don't presuppose a story. Be ready to find the story within the story. Keep on digging. Your first story isn't your best. It's a nice story and you feel good about it. But actually, the second and third story, once you start digging, is actually the better story. This mirrored my last year where I had my first show and second show in my Google document. I was very happy with them. Maybe I would launch these shows, debate shows. No, the third and fourth were better, and then the sixth and the seventh were better, and now it's the 14th show that I have a partnership with iHeart and I released. That's what the craft should. That's why it's a craft, not just another show you're putting out there.
Do you think that's missing in terms of just sports media in general, just the craft and respecting quality instead of just quantity in terms of even distributing content, as well as getting that feedback in terms of likes and just even if it's comments that are harsh and that may disagree, that person might be thriving over what's going on.
I was going to push back at your question initially, saying it is more things change and more things stay the same is the expression. But I mean, like 40 years ago, Frank DeFord at Sports Illustrated would have been bemoaning what this is, and 80 years ago, Shirley Povich would have been moaning it. So I have whatever bone that is in my body to say it's good to have more. When you have more, you'll have too much stuff that is half baked and too much stuff that is this and too much stuff. But what you just invoked was something that we all had to come to grips with in real time in the early 2010s, or maybe even before that, full on available market research in likes and in, mentions and in all these things, right? And there has been a correction and then a market correction to that. How real is all that? We all saw what the pivot to video was on Facebook. Was it real, or was the algorithm hacking it to make it look real, right? I'm going to be honest with you. I'm very proud of every single one of the followers I have on X. Do I believe every single one of them is a human who knows who I am? Absolutely not. And could I get sponsorships and claims right now for having a big number in people's eyes? Yes. Would it be? I mean, I still don't know how much of that is real. Don't.
Yeah.
I do know, as I've learned about the industry now, but also have built my career now with slightly more business sense. And I can say this proudly because my wife is a businesswoman and she is the one partner I have, the CEO of Real Ones Media, you should be aware of what that is, but I work best with people. I'm a people person, but one-to-one, and I think you can build a business now. Maybe not one-to-one, but let's say I had 500,000 viewers a day on ESPN, which is wonderful. And take that through a week, it's 2.5 million. Take that through a year, and you could say billions of impressions.
Yeah.
How many were remote controls that were left on a TV at a hotel? I don't know. I know people come up to me in the street. That's wonderful. So there's big numbers, but I could have a business with what's the opposite of 500,000? 1,000 people that subscribed and said, Tony, I know you, and I know you get me, and you know me, and you've reached out to me, and you responded to my email when I sent it to you, and that's my business now. Well, I can imagine a world where that's just as important, right? So I'm going to experiment and look for that as well.
So, on your next, I guess, adventure in sports, what was the spark? What was kind of that big moment to embark on just your next podcast venture or your next sports venture?
Well, the first thing was I took a pause to see how am I consuming sports right now. Still watching my PTI at 5:30, still watching my games, but a sports fan doesn't just live in the 3 hours their team is playing. Sports fandom, of course, is very culture. It's sports culture. You're living in a feed for parts of the day. I'm living in a feed. I'm taking it in via the feed. I'm also taking it via my YouTube feed and my social media feeds, right? And there was something I was enjoying watching sports that I had already known. It wasn't the game of the night. And so the genesis of this show that unlocked something in me was I send my friends, my group chats, different ones, a image every single day or every other day. And quite often there's a great conversation that comes in the text afterwards, but sometimes you lose it. But it's just like, yeah, I like this moment. I can see it again. When this play came up, let's talk hoopsology, right? Justin, I'm going to ask you now. This is my market research. This is more important to me than me saying I had 500,000 viewers a day around the world. What are your favorite basketball moments? I know I can do an episode right now on the Kawhi Leonard shot, Toronto. And Joel Embiid. Here's how I would start. I would start with that picture. His hands are on his knees, oddly, right? He's on the ground. Joel Embiid is over his, I think his right shoulder, looking up at the ball. The ball's hanging on the rim, and I will start that. Here's, you can start from Joel's perspective. You want to do it from a losing perspective, or you can do it from Kawhi's perspective. Here's Kawhi Leonard, and he's probably wondering how he got here. That's how I start every episode. It's very put ourselves in the moment. And I would, for that one, that deserves a frame by frame going through the play, right? And telling the oral history. And maybe my guest will be a crazy Raptors fan, the man who called it, the woman who called it. Maybe it'll be Kenny Beecham. Maybe be you. Doesn't really matter. I want to just have a fun conversation with somebody who's curious. Tell me what they felt when that happened. Tell me what they feel about it now. And maybe what we've discovered about the game. That's what I was doing in my feed every day. How did I feel about this then? How do I feel about this now? There's a podcast I love called Rewatchables on The Ringer, because I love movies, right? You can never, and it works every time for me. I could rewatch full games. I thought about that for a while. I'll do live events based on this podcast where we rewatch that game, maybe, or we rewatch the fourth quarter, and then we get to the play, and then we bring in a panel to talk about it, and then maybe I'll do a little by around the horn debate style game, and we have a big live event. That's what the industry allows for now, which I'm excited for. But my point was rewatchables. Maybe I won't rewatch a game in an episode. Actually, I'm a relivable, Justin. I want to relive the feeling I felt then and relive how I feel now and relive that moment and everything and the feelings involved. So that's what it was for me. What do I like now? I like rewatchables. I like Colin Samir. I like Rick Beato. I like Conan O'Brien. I like PTI. I like all these other things. But I like my sports fandom to be like my other fandoms. Be a little bit cultural at the moment rather than so reactionary. Because I had just done that for 25 years.
No, I think that's so cool. And especially sports these days, everything happens so quick. So it's just hard to really, remember those moments when something incredible happens. I mean, we just had the NBA finals with just the Knicks and Spurs and everything that went down during that. But like when the season starts,
season of episodes on moments on that, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
totally.
So I am proud to be in a situation once again where I don't feel like I'm chasing. I didn't feel like I was chasing the stories on Around the Horn. The stories just fell in your lap. Well, I feel like the moments. I mean, I'm going to experiment for the first part of the season with things that mean something to me. But I will happily play the hits. You tell me. You post something that gets 5 million views. Well, maybe I'll unpack that moment too. Then and then you're already you have a built-in audience. That's my market research. So here's the thing. I'm a different type of cat. I think in a lot of ways. I mean, I would have loved to have been a play-by-play man like my friend Spiro Ditas, who's called the Lakers and Knicks, and Ryan Rucco and all these. I would have loved to have been that guy. My voice just wasn't there. It wasn't that good. I got to see what that good was shoulder to shoulder with me in college, right? But what I am is a feelings guy. And it's a big industry. You can do a lot of different things. And
Yeah.
feelings can be those sports debate feelings that may touch a third rail, maybe adversarial, maybe provocative, maybe provoking your audience. I'm never going to be that guy either. But it's pretty good to not be that guy too. It's pretty good to say, I'm a happy, joyous guy. And if I got a note, then I got 100 notes after Around the Horn. I like the way you see sports, see the world through sports or see sports through the world. Well, that's a great note. I love that. So let me build the next show that kind of plays in that space too. And then after that, come a game show. After that could come a sports kids show. I that's where my head is, and not just the next debate show, right?
No, that's so cool. It's just I'm excited just to see, people we talked about kind of some negatives what's going on with just sports media these days, but with the advent of technology, I do feel like there's more opportunities to be innovative.
You can choose not to go there.
Exactly.
It's a wonderful play. That's why I say, again, sports is the most fun thing. Sports media should be more like that, but it is more like that. Here, come follow your boy. Come welcome to my world, right? I mean, you can get to choose what you watch. You don't have to be just watching what you did watch, or if it gets to a certain point, then you can seek out things that are the storytelling that you like. So, Justin, I've got too long without asking you.
Sure.
What are your basketball moments? And remember, you don't have to tell me 2016 because I know it's the biggest. I know it's the greatest, of the greats. I like the human quirky. I was just putting pen to paper right now on Carlos Boozer. Not the hair. I could do the hair too. Pablo have done that one. Carlos Boozer once hit a layup, got fouled, turned around, gave a pump into the air, and hit Danny Crawford in the crotch. I would just love to, like, he punched a referee in the groin, celebrating, but accidentally, of course. Silly moments, quirky moments. What about basketball hoops and the study of hoopsology? What are some moments for you?
I would have to say, you probably saw it on The Last Dance. When I was younger, and now still, I am a big pro wrestling fan. So
Yeah.
I think it was a '98 finals, and I think they documented this where Dennis Rodman didn't go to practice, and instead he was in Las Vegas and he appeared on WCW Nitro, and it was just like, as a kid, it was just watching Carmelo and Dennis Rodman in real life just go at it, and then they're having a feud in wrestling at the same time. It just blew my mind. So I think that's a big moment for me. Another is college. I'm an alumni of the University of New Mexico, so the Pit. I don't know if you ever heard of that. Just one of the,
I am familiar.
one of the best college venues in the country.
Best home court experiences.
Yeah.
And advantages because of the elevation.
Yeah, just so there's a lot of incredible memories there. So a lot of it has to do with college. It's the '90s Bulls. I think one of the biggest memories, Robert Horry just hitting that shot against Sacramento. I mean, that lives in my mind. I'm not a Laker. I'm a Bulls fan.
The Horry shot.
Yeah.
The Derek Fisher shot.
Yeah.
Or what you forget immediately before that was Tim Duncan.
That's right.
Incredible moment, right? You forget those. So of course it's Iverson stepping over Tyronn Lue.
Right.
I could do a whole show on NBA Jam. I could do a whole show on Inside the NBA. I could do a whole show on Queen Latifah stealing the ball from Sean Kemp. The rocket shot. LeBron's block. Steph Curry's behind the back. OG's put back now. I got to get some time away from that. But those types of plays. Yeah.
No, it's incredible. Tony, thank you very much for the time. Truly appreciate it. Can you let our audience know where they can catch The Real Deal, any upcoming ventures, if you're on social media, anything else?
Heyo, it's me, Tony Reali, and please join me in my newest show, Real Deal with Tony Reali, where we unpack one irresistible sports moment at a time. We'll get your hoops in there, but any episode is different. I just talked to a football player who wore a single bar face mask. The last man to do it. I like those quirky human moments. If you like your sports stories with a side of human, or your human stories with a side of sports, meet me at The Real Deal. Wherever you get your podcasts, I'm happy to have a partner in iHeart that helps me tell those great sports culture stories. That's what this show is. You're going to feel good remembering and reliving some of sports' greatest moments on The Real Deal. You find me at Tony Reali on X and Tony Reali on Instagram. I'm on TikTok now. Some of my new dance moves are there because I got 3 young kids. And of course, Real Deal with Reali is where we are, and Tony Reali on YouTube. So find me there. Justin, thank you very much for
Yeah, likewise. Thanks very much, Tony. You've been on the list of people that we wanted to have on the show. So
Thank you.
awesome it was
Get
able
a
to
paper
happen.
ball. You can crumple it up. I'll pass to you. You can mute me. How about that? Mute me as we're going out here.
There you go. Thanks, Tony, so much.
You got it.